I heard a great quote a few days ago on the study of greatness. And he said, a lot of times we spend time on making something important because it is measurable versus measuring what is important. And I think sometimes we get caught in our own trap of following things that are easy to measure versus going to what is important and figuring out the complexities.
Welcome to Education Matters, where we dive into the stories and ideas shaping education today. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Today's guest is Paul McKenzie, a leader with over 30 years' experience in public education and a knack for inspiring those around him to really think differently about teaching and learning. Paul is currently the Assistant Superintendent in the Saanich School District on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, where he's helping to shape one of Canada's most collaborative and forward-thinking education systems. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Paul for about 8 years now, really dating back to his time as a superintendent in the Thames Valley District School Board in Ontario. Anyone that knows Paul will tell you his energy and passion for education are really infectious. I was lucky enough to work with him on his groundbreaking School Within a School initiative, which was a reimagining of high school that integrated interdisciplinary learning, co-teaching, and experimental projects with students. In short, it was one of the most ambitious and inspiring attempts at high school reform that I've ever seen. In today's episode, you'll learn about Paul's approach to education and how it was shaped by a childhood of unstructured play and curiosity in Owen Sound, Ontario, a lifelong love of literature, and a career rooted in creating spaces where students and teachers can really thrive. In our conversation, Paul reflects on how those early influences shaped his teaching and leadership style. We also discuss his move from Ontario to BC and what he's learned about the Canadian education system along the way. Paul shares his thoughts on scaling innovative programs, fostering resilience in students, and the importance of keeping education human, especially in an age of rapid technological change. This is a conversation about possibility, creativity, and the enduring power of public education to inspire hope and opportunity. So settle in and join me as we explore the big ideas and personal journey of Paul McKenzie. Paul McKenzie, welcome to the Education Matters podcast. Where does this podcast find you today?
Well, good morning, Jason. Just a pleasure to join you today. I'm coming to you from Vancouver Island and the lovely Saanich Peninsula, just in and around Victoria, British Columbia, and on the traditional territories of the Saanich people, where it is an honor to live, work, serve, and play. It's just great to be here with you, my friend.
Well, thank you for being here, and I look forward to this conversation. I do want to say that you live in probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in this world. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that and your current learning experiences. But Paul, like I like to do with every guest, I want folks to get a sense of the background and how my guests have grown up, because you all have had such important roles in education. I want folks to get a sense of what your backgrounds were like, what your learning experience is like. So maybe let's just start with where and when did you grow up?
So, Jason, I am a native of Ontario and was born and raised in Owen Sound. And my mom and dad still live there. My brother still lives there. And it's a beautiful small town just in southern Georgian Bay. And it was a terrific place to grow up as a young person, go to school, do all the things that young people do, play hockey, and just generally enjoy a great place to live, for sure.
Amazing. So you mentioned you played hockey. How else did you play as a child?
Oh, I think one of the neat things about being a young person in the time that I grew up was that, we really were in a place where we could construct our own play. And I think that one of the things that was beautiful about being in Owen Sound was that we had access to Georgian Bay, obviously, and lots of, parks and forests and just being able to be outside, and lots of unstructured play that I think was very formative for me, not just from the standpoint of organized sport or anything that I did, but just the opportunity to create and enjoy everything around us. And I think that was, when I look back on that period in time, I really think it was formative for me, and I believe that that's probably something that maybe we've lost a little bit.
So when you say unstructured play, can you give us some details? What was it like? Capture the flag kind of stuff, building
Oh,
forts.
yeah, sure. I mean, I think that we had so many kids in our neighborhood, and it was sandlot baseball or football or hiking or just making tree forts. I mean, it was just an amalgam of things. You'd get on your bike in the morning and really not start with a clear agenda of what the day was like, but by the time the streetlights came on, you had dirty knees and a whole fistful of memories. And I think that's kind of what it looked like in the summer in particular. I mean, obviously during school year, it had more structure to it for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But,
Mm-hmm.
I think you left at the beginning of the day and just made your own adventures. And I think that was remarkable about that time.
And you mentioned you were on Georgian Bay. What was that like? I don't think. I think we take it for granted, being where we are in Ontario and Canada in particular, with all the fresh water and the lakes we have around us.
Mhm.
What was it like to grow up near Georgian Bay?
Well, it's as you well know, Jason, a really remarkable part of Ontario, part of the world, really. And so accessing um, the Bruce Peninsula in particular was lovely
Mm-hmm.
for hiking, but also for swimming. My parents, my dad was an avid fisherman, so I spent a lot of time fishing with him and have amazing memories of early morning, climbing into the boat and watching the mist off the water as the sun came up, and fishing for, at the time it was rainbow trout, but maybe later on it was more salmon. But I remember that. I remember swimming. I just remember uh, just being in a place that just had all of the great things that the outdoor bring to your experience, and I think that those things help form the kind of person you become.
Okay, so Paul, you mentioned that all that great unstructured play had an impact on you. Can you get into any detail there? How do you think all that kind of play and that kind of experience in your childhood impacted who you are today and how you learn?
It's a great question, Jason. I think that when I think of the period of growing up and having, I guess, a little bit of autonomy about kind of how you would use your time and um, with others create play and learn the art of collaboration to some extent. I mean, I think that that on any given day as children, you have the opportunity through those social experiences to construct opportunities to play, resolve challenges among one another, be creative, and also experience the world through trial and error in a lot of cases. And when I think about how those things became formative to me, and I think about my early days as a classroom teacher, I think that those very kinds of things around finding ways to create ownership opportunities and engagement opportunities for my students became a central piece to how I looked at my classroom. And I can't help but think that a big part of that came from just kind of the art and science of play as a young
Hmm.
person.
Hmm. So, is there anything about that kind of play or that kind of upbringing that you wish children today experience more of?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Jason, I feel like the nature of play today has become certainly a lot more structured. I mean, I raised two daughters in London, Ontario, and to the extent that we could, we wanted to create those opportunities for our children to have that chance to experience play the way we did a little bit. But I think in truth the circumstances of our present are a lot more structured. It feels like I have two grandsons that are lovely little boys in Port Moody, and they're just about a couple days away from their sixth birthday. And they certainly, by virtue of being twins, they engage in that play as well. But I
Mm.
think there seems to be an awful lot more structure, and I think that there are merits to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels a little bit like um, that the sort of the creativity and autonomy that existed, in the past isn't maybe as present today. Um, and as I'm saying this, I feel like I sound like one of those old people that are sitting feeding the squirrels
Well,
and complaining about everything.
no, yeah, and there's maybe always an element to that to every generation, but I truly believe, and it's actually I think an emerging theme of my interviews so far, that our generation, broadly speaking, those of us that grew up, and let's say I even have someone as early as the 50s, 60s growing up, but certainly 70s, 80s, 90s, most of the folks that I've interviewed have grown up feel that there's a great loss. And I think it's more than just one generation kind of poo-pooing the next, so to speak. I really do believe that there was a lot of merit and value in the way we grew up in that unstructured environment where you had to negotiate the rules with other kids that often weren't great kids, but you still found ways to play together. And then, over time, those skills, I think, have led to a lot of really great and strong characters. So maybe it's something we get into a little bit more. But let's fast forward a bit to your education, and I just actually want to linger a little bit longer, and maybe your informal education. What was the first thing that you really remember loving to learn?
Oh, I think very early. These are great questions, by the way. I think very early on, I loved story, and I
Mm.
remember my mom reading to me. I think mostly my mom, sometimes my dad, but I have very vivid memories of mom reading to me, and often the same book over and over.
Mm.
Uh, there was a book that she read to me. I just talked to my mom about this recently, and I can't even remember, but it was something about what was under the streets, and I was just fascinated with, what was under the streets. I have no idea why, but I really wanted to know, and I couldn't get enough of that. But I just remember very vividly being excited about story and being told stories and climbing into the experience of story. And that to me, again, I think probably became foundational. And what's marvelous now is I fast forward to my time as a parent, and that opportunity that I instilled in my own daughters, reading to them. I mean, we were reading Harry
Mm.
Potter together when they first came
Mm-hmm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
And now my grandsons, and sitting and telling them stories, and particularly when we can actually include them as characters in the story. So I think for sure, Jason, that was a big part of my hunger and my curiosity, just in the beauty of story.
So tell me a little bit about your formal education. What aspects of it stand out to you?
Well, again, I grew up in, as I said, Owen Sound, small elementary school, and I had such amazing teachers that inspired me, certainly engaged me, created the conditions for learning to be simultaneously fun and challenging. I have vivid remembrances of my grade 4 teacher, Miss Muxlow, who initiated project-based learning, and I felt like that was maybe one of the very first memories I have of having kind of control of my experience as a learner. And I was excited about the War of 1812, so that was the rabbit hole I went down. So I moved from what's under the street to, what happened in 1812. And having the ability to do that with a teacher that really encouraged that. And so I have very fond memories of my formative early days as a student and as a learner, particularly in those moments where the teacher took those steps to engage the content with the person. And again, those are things that really stuck with me, and later on kind of manifested themselves in different ways in my own career, I think, and certainly my
Well,
parenting, I think, too.
oh, wonderful. Certainly you get points for being the first Canadian here to mention the War of 1812 for all the American listeners.
Well, I
we'll
got a
just-
second story about Miss Muxlow. So that was in 1972, and those of us that were around for that will know that was when the Canada USSR series was on, and the last game was on a school day. And I remember Miss Muxlow putting a little TV, couldn't have been more than 12-inch screen at the front of the classroom so that we could see that iconic moment in hockey history. So, we had our math to do, I know that, but we were able to see that moment, and that's one of those things that sticks with you for sure.
Well, and I love that, because one of the other emerging themes is like joy in education, and
Absolutely.
certainly watching the Summit series was in no way part of the curriculum at the time. However, it certainly
No.
is one of the heritage moments, and by her allowing you to experience that joy, also made sure that you have a vivid memory of where you were when that famous game was played.
Yes. Well, and I know for other listeners that we can translate that to the Sidney Crosby moment, but that was my for sure heritage moment as a young person. Miss Muxlow had a big deal to do with that for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, when it comes to what you studied, you mentioned a passion and a sort of like instant gravitation to storytelling. Is there anything in particular, maybe a subject, maybe a book, maybe it was another teacher that impacted how you think and work today the most?
Oh, absolutely. And there's so many, through my time. I remember certainly, and again, I became an English teacher, so that probably was an area that obviously was a fascination for me. But certainly in middle school, I had a teacher that introduced me to The Hobbit. She actually gifted me the book, and she said, "Paul, I think you would really enjoy this book." And it took me. I remember because it was like the last day of school, and it was the first book I read of that summer. I was my parents really loved taking us camping in the summer, so there were so many lazy days just sitting around, on a lawn chair or near a lake reading. And The Hobbit was a very memorable experience for me. But I think too that when I entered high school, particularly in my English classes, the opportunity to read some of the classics, Oliver Twist and I was probably one of the very few students that enjoyed Shakespeare. I just was fascinated with the music of the language. I didn't really know why, really per se, but I just loved the cadence and the rhythms of it. And it's interesting because you don't, as a young male growing up in high school in Owen Sound, Ontario, you don't necessarily admit those things. But I had a deep fascination for it all through high school, and really feel that there were teachers all the way along there that way that in various ways tweaked that interest for sure.
And how has the way you've learned and maybe the Shakespeare or love of story impacted how you work and influenced how you work?
Well, I think that there's there are a number of elements to that, Jason, from the standpoint of, I'll maybe start with just my own teaching career and just my own interest as an English educator in kind of imbuing that love of story and the patterns of story and the rhythms of it, and the conversations that emerge from it. Because I think that one of the fascinating elements of reading and experiencing text in any kind of form is its opportunity to open critical thinking up and also creative thinking. And I always saw those as sort of bookends of,
Hmm.
excuse the metaphor, of kind of what we should be trying to spend our time on as educators. Is how do I simultaneously invoke that ability to discern through text and make meaning of it, but also look at it creatively from the standpoint of how your perspective aligns or doesn't align to character, and really just how these patterns of story, repeated in different ways, actually help make meaning of the world around us. And so
Hmm.
those were probably central elements to what inspired me to become an educator. But I think the other part of this, and this is where my experience with other teachers and watching and observing the craft, was around how do I build a classroom that is responsive, engaging, challenging us, safe for expression of thought, of articulation of thought, of precision of thought, and to what extent do I create those conditions in my classroom around the larger elements of connecting it to the world as well. So, it's what did story do to inspire me to want to share that? What was one element of it, but what did it teach me through the experiences I had from you know elementary, middle school, secondary teachers, even university professors, to really connect me to almost the craft of what's possible in terms of universal learnings that we can use to transform our students' lives.
Wonderfully put. As a fellow English major, I agree with you on a lot of that, and have had a similar influence in my thinking. One of the main reasons I wanted to have you as a guest is you are one of the few educators that I know that's been an administrator in two different provinces in Canada, in beginning with Thames Valley in Ontario, and then in Saanich, as you mentioned, in BC. Can you kind of describe what that's been like for you, and how and what you've learned about Canadian education in general?
Oh, sure, Jason. Great question. Again, as you mentioned, I'm presently the assistant superintendent here in the Saanich School District, and this is, I believe, been here since 2019. Prior to that, I had opportunity to work in the Thames Valley District School Board, which is centered around London, Ontario, but includes the Middlesex, Oxford, and Elgin counties, and a very big school district. Um, and I was blessed really to in my Ontario experience to be surrounded very early in my career with amazing, dynamic, progressive educators that really spent a lot of time working alongside me to help me develop my craft, my voice as an educator, and to work in the communities that I served. And I also had great leadership opportunities through the district to explore leadership at the district level, as an administrator, and then ultimately as a superintendent for 5 years. And in that time, I really saw great strengths in the Ontario school system in terms of its capacity, particularly to identify clear expectations and outcomes for learners inside subject areas, and build kind of a K to 12 structure. And inside that, I really found great opportunity for growth. Um, as my own progression in public education in Ontario evolved, I became increasingly curious about how the structures were impacting the current kind of learner, and whether or
Hmm.
not there might be opportunity for us to reach beyond kind of the silos of subject, for example, in secondary, to reimagine subject disciplines in a different way, and look maybe more broadly beyond the expectation content to the skill prompts inside those expectations, to look at ways that we could look at cross-disciplinary pollination of subject around kind of inquiry-based modalities. And so in that regard, I saw some elements of it, but it wasn't necessarily something that was naturally intuitive to me in my time in Ontario. It was something that I felt was a need. One of the compelling elements of moving to British Columbia was that I saw certainly in the BC curriculum, by virtue of its structures around, big core competencies, where it almost implied, the kind of integration and interdisciplinary kind of context that I was kind of searching for a little bit. And Jason, from our prior experience together, that particularly as a superintendent, that was an area that I was really becoming more increasingly interested in, and actually sought out some opportunities to look for ways that we could learn from some of our colleagues in British Columbia. So it was with some degree of irony that I ended up here in this province, because I believe that it fit my own kind of evolution as an educator, my own curiosity and my own fascination with all of this. The other part that you asked about was sort of Canadian education in general. And I think that one of the great blessings of being in this country is that we have some phenomenal education systems. And I think that bears out through international, acknowledgments. And I feel fortunate to have learned and grown in a province that had a deep interest in, moving the needle on education, particularly in areas that they saw a specific need in, around literacy in particular. But then also moving to a province that saw those same things, but was contemplating the possibilities of the kinds of integrated structures that cross disciplines a little bit more. So I really felt that was and is a fantastic fit. So I think both have had merits, and I've learned from both. But it's been a nice evolution for me to move into a school district in a province that is deeply rooted in the possibilities of a curriculum that expands that way, and also is collaborative in that very spirit too. So it's been wonderful.
Paul, in your I want to say 30 plus years, is that about accurate?
Yeah, keep going.
Let's just go with 30, 40 plus years.
Yeah, I think with the 1972 reference probably gives you a little bit of a context. But yeah, I think I might be just north of 35 years. So I should probably do the math on that.
I don't want you to be bashful, but I actually want you to lean into it. That's why I have you here in this experience, particularly for a question like this. Like, after all these years, can you kind of describe for us some of the most inspiring things you've seen? I don't think we do a good enough job in the education community of talking about some of the really great things that happen.
Oh boy, there's that. The list is long, Jason. But I think that if I were to center it on two things, I might speak to one of the most inspiring things that I had the chance to be a part of and provide some leadership to was some work that we were doing during my last 4 or 5 years in Thames Valley, along with the director of education at the time, Laura Elliott, around reimagining high school. We entered into a long project by which we engaged our community in a project called Rethink Secondary Education. And the feedback that we were getting from our schools, our community, our students was that while our students felt safe and secure and valued in school, they sometimes wondered about the possibilities of having more ownership in their learning, and how we could perhaps create a little bit more engagement across our district. And so one of the areas that we began to explore was through a program that you're familiar with called School Within a School, was around how might we And I always start with these kind of big questions. How might we, look at a structure that integrates curriculum, looks at kind of the fusion points of cross-disciplinary curriculum delivery, fuses that with experiential learning opportunities, the learners as doers, fusing also to that the idea of creating possibilities for co-teaching, co-learning experiences in the classroom and across classrooms. And then through the lens of kind of a design thinking kind of modality where it's project inquiry based kinds of learning where students are ostensibly the owners of their learning, and that the instructors are fusing the curriculum around that to create the conditions for that. And extend that also out to ways that we engage our community to make our community better. So inside the spirit of that was a big part of what I took on with a colleague of mine who I have immense respect for. His name is Rick Pardo, and he was a teacher leader in our district to work alongside me and others to really try to bring this kind of thing to life. And over a period of about 2.5, 3 years, we really leaned into that work around how would we create the opportunity and the permission really to support schools that were interested in that endeavor. And over across 30 high schools over that period, I think in excess of 20 of them started projects like that. Some of them just, subject combinations of two, but some of our bigger ones had connectivity of 4 subjects together, 4 teachers working with a cohort of students over a semester, and those big ones still exist today in Thames Valley. One of them being at H.B. Beale Secondary School, where I had the privilege of being a principal a number of years ago, and it probably for me symbolized some of the most powerful possibilities inside public education by virtue of how it really helped accelerate teacher expertise, created student and educator agency in terms of their belief in themselves and their work, and the extent to which it also kind of built community, not just from a classroom context, but from a school context and a community context. Because as I said, one of the things we were extremely fascinated with, and I still remain fascinated in, is how do we connect all of these things through experience and opportunity to the wider community and to the wider world. And to me, that was probably one of, and continues to be, an example for me of what was possible and what is possible, for sure. So that to me probably stands out in terms of my time in Thames Valley. And certainly here in Saanich, I've had recently an opportunity, along with an amazing superintendent named Dave Everwin and an amazing team here, to start to look at how we reimagine an implementation of a strategic plan that really fuses voice across the margins of our community to really affect change. And I can get into that a little bit with you, but certainly those areas for me have been remarkable for just what I saw happen in classrooms.
Yeah, I certainly would relish the opportunity to talk about Saanich and Beale in particular, because I still say to this day that was some of the most progressive work I've seen, the most ambitious, in the very least, the most ambitious attempt to reimagine what teaching and learning can look like. Can you maybe describe for our audience, like if you have one example of what that school within a school project looked like? Because I'd like to make it as tangible as possible for the audience.
Sure. No, I can, Jason. I'm happy to kind of give you a kind of an on the ground kind of sense of what it was like. We as I mentioned, we had 4 teachers that were enthusiastic about doing the work, and it fused English, grade 9 English, mathematics, science, and geography. So we had specified people that were willing to take this on. We had a physical space that connected 2 classrooms. So our cohort in the very first year was nearly 75 students. So it had to hit a critical mass in terms of number of students. We didn't pre-select the students. So every ability level had opportunity to participate. We ran a parent session to explain what we were looking to do and why we were looking to do it. And then the classroom teachers took it upon themselves to look at ways that they could create and teach sort of inquiry-based learning models in small chunks initially, and fuse the curriculum around that. So they would, land on a specific topic, and then based on that, look at how they would fuse the big ideas of each of their courses to the work of the inquiry that the students were developing. And that through that grade 9 period, they would, take on increasingly larger kind of tasks, culminating in a showcase day wherein their summative task was to present their work around a specific endeavor that they were looking at to serve the community, kind of a capstone, really. And then we would bring community members in to ask them questions and give some feedback on their work, and also give the parents an opportunity to see the work that their students were doing as well. And that was, the project. So in that we had, 70 students with 4 credits in play. And over the course of that year, I think when we came to the end of the year, we were trying to track all kinds of different ways of looking at that. But in terms of credit accumulation, it was almost, I think we only had one student that missed 1 credit out of all of that. So it far exceeded the success rate of the rest of the grade 9 cohort. Office referrals were 0. And if you know a little bit about the school, that in itself was quite remarkable. But I think the piece that we really stood up and took note of was just the student response to this in terms of how they felt as learners, and the excitement of the classroom teachers that were involved in this. And to this day, those 4 teachers are still integrally involved in this. And I think one of the comments at the end of the first term was that they were tired, but couldn't wait to get started again.
Yeah,
I think
Paul, I just
sorry.
want to put some emphasis. No, you described that wonderfully. I just want to put some emphasis on key points because you were deeply involved in the messiness, the necessary messiness of making this happen. And me, as I just happened to get parachuted in at the right time to kind of observe from the outside. And when I got there, I saw nothing that looked like traditional grade 9. There were no desks in a row. There was no lecturer. What I did see is 4 teachers collaborating, not only in the classroom through, the inquiry project that the students were all working on, but even spent a lot of time with them in their planning and their structuring, which was very complicated, which was very onerous. But I remember a comment from the teacher saying something similar: "This is hard, but I will never go back to teaching in a regular classroom again." And then, of course, the engagement level of the students was off the charts. So the work that I saw there, I went back and I've since told everybody that would listen about this work. And I asked myself this question often. One, why didn't that expand to every school in your district? It was the response from students, parents, teachers was off the charts. But I did remember you telling me like you had to rework the bell schedule, like the way the entire structure was set up was not conducive to this. So I understand the hurdles, but once you and the other administrators kind of saw at least the immediate impact, what was it that wasn't scalable, or like why haven't, like, you brought it to Saanich, and why isn't this kind of growing everywhere given the tremendous response we saw there?
Jason, it's a great question. I know that generally there was very strong support among classroom teachers that and it's funny because we were talking a lot about this during the process around how do we make it safer for teachers that are maybe curious about this, but maybe a little afraid. I mean, I think the initial concern we had, even the teachers that we were working with that were enthusiastic about this said, we love this, but I know that there are some that'll really struggle with this because they have a perception of a subject in a specific way, and that this might be perceived as watering something down. I know that, one of the concerns at the district level was there's a provincial grade 9 mathematics test around competency in grade 9, and maybe a concern that the students that are within a school construct weren't going to be getting enough of the math. And interestingly, the students that were in the school within a school program, from the math standpoint, actually outperformed the students that were in the full cohort.
This is what I mean. Like, it's a good question to ask. Like, are we shortchanging them on some core learning? Then the studies come back and the answer is no. It's actually better. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, and they were doing okay. So I think we started to look at, how do we make this a little bit easier? It was definitely on our mind is what are the scalable properties, which is what we began to measure, which was, I think I mentioned, what are we learning about teacher expertise in this from the teachers involved in it? What are we learning about learner and teacher agency in that? And what are we learning also about community in that standpoint? So we actually tried to do some developmental evaluation metrics on early stage innovation, because our that very question was on our mind. Like, how, if this is good for some, how could it be good for all? And I think there were probably, when I roll back the tape, Jason, on this, because, I was there for 5 years and I think we made a really good, a bit of progress. But after I left, within a couple of years, it started to, lose a little bit of its momentum. Was that, probably we needed a few more champions at the senior level to make that possible. And that is in no way disrespectful to the people that were there. But, if you've come up through a system, you're familiar with the orthodoxy, and perhaps maybe we were a little bit too married to the orthodoxy of traditional ways of looking at education, even though the evidence was telling us that we needed to start to think about this differently. So I think that's one thing.
Yeah,
for sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay.
What else? What else do you feel would be a good lesson for others to learn when taking on or trying to change the average classroom? Which, by the way, everybody agrees they want to change, right? And I think there's been broad agreement for 20 plus years, maybe longer, that that static classroom has to change. So. Any other impediments you think? Because the reason I'm asking this, Paul, because I think most are imagined. I don't think they're real. I don't actually think they're real impediments.
Well, I think, you mentioned some of the structural elements of it in terms of scheduling and creating the critical mass within, a secondary timetable, for example. And so we knew that there are structural elements, but I also felt that most, if not all of them, were manageable if you actually spent some time thinking about the ways they could work. I mean, and as a former secondary person, you build the timetable ideally for what is most necessary and what's most needed for your students, not the other way around. And sometimes the efficiencies of something become more compelling than, having the courage to be vulnerable to try something different. And I think that invokes some fears for people in a number of different ways. I mean, we were worried initially that perhaps the teachers unions would be concerned about it, but in truth, once the educators themselves got immersed in this, they were our biggest advocates for saying, listen, we really like this, and it might be a variation on the theme, but we really want you to support it. And so I think being transparent about those things. I also think too, working with the school-based leadership on helping them in projects like this that have a different feel and a different look, and giving them the
Mm-hmm.
tools to help with that. I think that probably that would be an area that I would, if I were to go back, I'd say, okay, maybe we needed a
Mm.
little bit more time just to help the school leaders with this particular part of it, and so that they could help channel that. And I don't, that's not, again, I worked with such amazing people,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all busy, and so
Mm-hmm.
if I we know this about the human brain, that if there's a more efficient path to something, we'll
Sure.
more than likely take it. And I think to some extent, school systems can be a bit of that. Um, but I think that what certainly has been borne out from this experience is that it's possible. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
the question of scalability is still the challenge that we face. But I think that it is absolutely imperative for us to continue to push on that, and think about how we can be, you know, uh, constantly in a state of reimagining possibility, being responsive to that, creating the collaborative space to look at it, the possibilities of it, keeping it aligned to a larger ethos, like a strategic plan, and making it impactful.
Mm.
I heard a great quote a few days ago, and it was an analytics person on the study of greatness, and he said,
Mm.
a lot of times we spend time on um, making something important because it is measurable versus measuring what is important. And I think
Mm.
sometimes we get caught in um, our own trap of following things that are easy to measure versus going to what is important and figuring out the complexities of that. And I just found that a fascinating quote that I think applies in a lot of contexts.
So when it comes to the scalability and let's call it just like the administrative side of that, of all that, if I gave you a magic wand, what are the key elements that you would change tomorrow and you would be fairly certain would allow you to at least begin to scale that kind of work?
Well, I think, Jason, I think that this is where the imperative of nuanced, responsive leadership really comes into play. I think the extent to which we cultivate leaders across all parts of our sector to be um, open to possibility, to be good listeners. I mean, keep in mind a lot of what came out of School Within a School, and many initiatives that have had traction have often come from the voices of students, or the voices of community, or the voices of a wider sector that are saying we need to look at change. Um, but not, I guess not but and how do we cultivate the kind of leadership that can receive that, place it in context, find the aligning elements, and through collaboration work on that. And as I said earlier, one of the really neat things about being here as an assistant superintendent in BC is that there are a number of really good collaborative structures that are in place here around leaders working with one another, and I think that helps us. But it may sound very simplistic, but I really believe that if we can create the leadership conditions that allow for that that it gives the permission for educators to step into that, and then I guess concurrently creating the conditions to allow folks the opportunity to see safety in being courageous in their craft, being vulnerable in their craft, and being and knowing that they're going to be protected and safe in that. And I really believe that those are critical to that. And if I could wave a magic wand over a province to create the mindset that allows for that, I think it would be remarkable. Because if we go too fast, we ultimately end up going alone. But if we can find a way to take people with us, we can really go a lot of distance.
Wonderfully put. So, Paul, if you look forward, say 50 years into the future, what does education look like? And you can take this in any direction you want, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Well, Jason, what I would hope I guess, and I'll maybe start with that because I think that word hope and belief are not esoteric to me, but very tangible things. And I would hope that 50 years hence that public education still is the harbinger and the protector and the champion of hope and opportunity.
Mm,
I also hope that it is human, and in that,
mm,
I think that one of the things that generative AI is bringing upon us is the notion of uh, of a kind of technological change that has the potential to radically alter the trajectory of public education, but it also has the possibility to radically enhance the experience of learners if we hold the truth that is, I believe, self-evident, that what makes public education fantastic is the human ways that we integrate, connect our learners to the experience, and the extent to which we use technology to amplify those things, not the other way around. So, in the context of what is upon us right now in terms of all of the shifts, social change, technological change, how do we keep this as human as possible? Create the conditions whereby creativity and critical thinking and possibility and engaging ourselves in the greater good of connecting ourselves to the wider commitment to our world, is, I think, tantamount to what is necessary and possible. And over the next 50 years, I hope that those are the things that we continue to lean into deeply. I have massive faith in that possibility, but I also believe that it requires of us a steadfast commitment to it because, to quote Lincoln, the situation is piled high with difficulties. The pandemic radically altered our experience and pointed to some things that we needed to consider about public education.
mm.
But it pointed to the power of human connection and community and being a participant in those things. And I think that we have a big opportunity to be the shapers of that. And the young people that we have in our care require that stewardship along this journey. And I'm an optimist. I always have been, and I believe the virtues that have got us here are the things that can drive us forward. We
Mm.
happen to be in a position, though, that requires us to think carefully about the possibilities inside that.
Well, sir, that's wonderfully put from one of the truly great guys in education. So, with that, to wrap up, Paul, can you tell us something surprising that your social media algorithm says about you? So, I'll give you a second to think on that. I'll give you an example. So, apparently, mine tells me that as I age, I am quite obsessed with lawn care videos. Like I apparently I love watching a guy with a grass trimmer perfectly edge the lawn, and it does seem about right for a guy my age. Anything that your media algorithm says about you?
Oh wow, that's a great question, Jason. I It's funny. I'm a big Ted Lasso fan, so it seems that
Mm.
I'm getting a lot of algorithms that point me to uh, little vignettes from that show about hope and belief and uh,
It sounds about right.
it's really interesting.
Mm.
And I actually mentioned that to my wife last night. I said, you know. I keep getting Ted Lasso videos, and she says, "Well, hello."
You're kind of Ted Lasso.
When I got married, I had that mustache, but no, it's really interesting, and so I'm also getting lots of really interesting because I'm of a certain age, hacks on how to live longer and eat better. So. There's a lot of tofu in my diet lately. So,
Excellent, excellent. Do you have a book, podcast, video, movie, album that you would recommend to
oh,
the listeners?
geez, I'm an avid reader still. I think that my professional reading, I still am curious about. leadership and continuous learning in that regard. I have been following Adam Grant a little bit lately, and Simon Sinek to me is always somebody I like to pick up. I just read the Infinite Game that I found, really actually kind of a nice synopsis of just where we are and where possibility lies in public education, but just in general, how to sort of view the world. I love great fiction. Just read Gentleman in Moscow. I think phenomenal read. And from a podcast standpoint, I'm really all over the map. I certainly like kind of entertainment based podcasts, but also Michael Lewis has a podcast out around just coaching. As you know, I'm still deeply fascinated in the field of coaching, particularly from a sports standpoint, but I still see incredible merits from that as well. So I try to keep myself active as possible and read as widely as possible as well. So always looking for a good page turner, particularly as we head into the summer.
Well, Paul McKenzie, thank you so much for joining us.
Jason, it has been a pleasure, and I appreciate you. I appreciate, for those that are listening, Jason and I have had a number of years of various opportunities to learn from one another. And what I've always appreciated, Jason, about you is your integrity, your absolute curiosity about learning, and also your sense of willingness to engage in the bigger questions of public education. And I am very, very blessed indeed to know you and to work alongside you. And it's been just an absolute honor to spend some time with you today.
Thank you very much, Paul. You are too kind.
It comes from the heart, my friend. And if there's any way we could manufacture a Toronto Maple Leaf Stanley Cup, I would really appreciate any help you can do in that. Pretty alone out here on the island. It's not Leaf country.
Well, no better way to end the podcast with Go Leafs.
Yes, absolutely.
This podcast is recorded on the territory and Treaty 13 lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. This show is edited and produced by the marvelous and talented Andrew Mastroianni. If you like what you're hearing, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, remember, there's absolutely no inevitability as long as there's a willingness to contemplate what's happening. I'm your host, Jason Bucheri. Until next time.